In the world of artificial intelligence, there is only one king. For years, one company has so completely dominated the landscape that its name has become synonymous with AI progress. That company is NVIDIA. It doesn't just lead the market, it is the market. By 2025, NVIDIA's GPUs were the engine inside 94% of the world's AI data centers. Its longtime rival AMD held a mere 6%. It wasn't even a competitor, it was a rounding error. So when OpenAI, the most important and powerful AI company on Earth, announced it was building its next-generation infrastructure, the choice seemed obvious. It was a foregone conclusion. Except, they didn't choose NVIDIA. In a move that shocked Wall Street and Silicon Valley, OpenAI announced a massive, multi-billion-dollar deal not with the king, but with the underdog. They chose AMD. This wasn't just a purchase order. It was a fundamental bet that could be worth over $100 billion. And it came with a catch. A strange, unprecedented agreement that ties the fate of both companies together, involving a potential 10% stake in AMD itself. What did OpenAI see that the other 94% of the market missed? How did AMD, a company that was slipping into total AI irrelevance, pull off the most important deal of the decade? This isn't a story about chips. It's a story about a hidden monopoly, a desperate gamble, and a secret alliance forged to break an iron grip. The Moat. To understand how shocking this is, you need to understand the battlefield. This was never a fair fight. Both AMD and NVIDIA have been making graphics processing units, or GPUs, for decades. But while they were fighting for pixels in video games, NVIDIA was quietly building a fortress. The fortress wasn't made of silicon, it was made of software. In 2007, NVIDIA released something called CUDA, the Compute Unified Device Architecture. It sounds complicated, but its purpose was revolutionary. It was a software key. It allowed researchers and scientists to unlock the thousands of tiny cores inside a GPU, not for graphics, but for general-purpose computation. It turned a gaming card into a miniature supercomputer. AMD's GPUs were powerful, but they had no key. They had no ecosystem. When the first sparks of the deep learning revolution began, researchers didn't just choose NVIDIA. They built their entire world on top of CUDA. An entire generation of scientists and engineers learned it as their default language. NVIDIA nurtured this. They released powerful libraries like cuDNN for neural networks. They sponsored research. They gave universities free hardware. They made themselves the bedrock of progress. AMD, meanwhile, was fighting a completely different war. They were locked in a brutal, company-defining battle with Intel in the CPU market, a fight they were finally winning with their Ryzen chips. They were also busy securing their dominance in the console market, powering both the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox. They won those battles, but they had taken their eye off the biggest prize in modern history. While AMD was focused on gamers and office PCs, NVIDIA was looking at the horizon. In their 2016 shareholder report, years before ChatGPT was a household name, NVIDIA was already talking about an exponential AI revolution. They were building chips like the Tesla P100, designed specifically for this future. When that future finally arrived, everyone needed shovels for the new gold rush, and NVIDIA was the only company selling them. The gamble. At first, the AI boom lifted all boats. AMD's revenue skyrocketed. It jumped from just under $10 billion in 2020 to over $23 billion in 2022. It seemed like they were finally in the game. But then, the tide went out. The following year, AMD's revenue dropped, and their profit. That told the real story. In 2021, at the height of the boom, AMD posted a record $3.7 billion in profit. The next year, that nosedived to $1.2 billion. The year after, it collapsed again to just $600 million. The market had come to a crucial realization. The boom was real, but AMD wasn't the answer. Researchers who had tried AMD's hardware in desperation found themselves stranded. The hardware was fine, but the software was a nightmare. They weren't just buying chips, they were buying an ecosystem. And AMD didn't have one. By 2023, there was no doubt. AMD was catastrophically, hopelessly behind. Lisa Su, AMD's CEO, knew she had to do something. She needed to bet the entire company on a pivot. In 2022, AMD finalized the largest chip deal in history, a $49 billion acquisition of a company called Xilinx. But AMD didn't have $49 billion in cash. Instead, they performed a massive stock transaction. They printed their own shares to pay for the deal. This wasn't just a purchase, it was a dilution, and investors hated it. The acquisition was complex, focused on adaptive computing and FPGAs, which were powerful but niche. It wasn't a direct answer to NVIDIA. AMD's stock, which had peaked at $143, tumbled all the way down to $84. Investor confidence sank. AMD followed this by acquiring Nod AI, an open-source AI software company. They were desperately trying to buy what NVIDIA had spent 15 years building for free. The company was all in. They had bet the house. Now, they just had to deliver. The fight. AMD's big answer finally came. It was a new line of chips, the Instinct MI300 series, and specifically the MI300X. On paper, it was a monster. This was a GPU built from the ground up for one purpose: to run large language models. It had a key advantage over NVIDIA's flagship H100. That advantage was memory. The MI300X had more high-bandwidth memory, and its memory bandwidth was 60% faster at 5.3 terabytes per second. For AI models, which are constantly memory-bound, this was a huge deal. It promised better performance and, most importantly, a lower cost per token. This was AMD's real chance. They came out swinging. They quickly secured big-name customers. Microsoft, Dell, and Meta all announced they would use the MI300 series for their own AI training and inference. The anticipation was massive. Analysts projected the new chip line would generate $8 billion in new revenue. But then nothing happened. Those $8 billion projections were quietly slashed to $5 billion. Then the 2024 results came in. The entire Instinct Accelerator division, not just the new chip, had only brought in $5 billion. The hype had fizzled. An HSBC analyst bluntly wrote that AMD's roadmap was less competitive than we previously thought. The MI300X, for all its technical prowess, had become a footnote, and the reason was painfully, predictably familiar. The hardware was good, the software was not. AMD's alternative to CUDA is called ROCm. To win, it didn't just have to be as good as CUDA, it had to be better. It wasn't even close. Developers found it brittle. The documentation was poor. It was notoriously difficult to install and deploy out of the box. It was flexible, yes, but it required a level of engineering expertise that most companies didn't have, or didn't want to pay for. Worse, AMD had frustrated the one community it needed most: the developers. For years, ROCm didn't even officially support AMD's own consumer gaming cards. NVIDIA, by contrast, allowed CUDA to run on everything from a $300 GeForce card to a $30,000 data center GPU. This meant any student, hobbyist, or researcher could start learning and building on the CUDA ecosystem from their bedroom. AMD had built a walled garden and then locked the gate. It was a tough time. Lisa Su was desperately trying to catch up to NVIDIA, but also to her own investors' sky-high expectations. One analyst said, "We applaud the progress. Growing a roughly $4 billion AI franchise from nothing? Unfortunately, investor expectations have remained persistently out of reach." AMD had built a faster car, but the car had no roads, no gas stations, and no one knew how to drive it. It seemed the moat was simply too wide to cross. But then, NVIDIA's greatest strength became its greatest weakness: the 10% bet. NVIDIA's 94% market share meant one thing: bottlenecks. The H100 and H200 chips, despite being a generation old, were perpetually sold out. Customers faced massive, crippling wait times. The entire multi-trillion-dollar AI industry was dangerously, completely overdependent on a single supplier. And that supplier could name its price. This created an NVIDIA tax that every company was forced to pay. The industry was desperate for an alternative. Anyone. The first tiny crack in the dam appeared in late 2024. A cloud infrastructure provider named Vultr announced a partnership with AMD. They would offer the Instinct MI300X GPUs on their cloud platform. This was more important than it seemed. It was the first time developers could easily deploy and test AMD's latest architecture on a public platform without buying the hardware themselves. They could kick the tires, but the real earthquake happened on June 12th, 2025. At AMD's Advancing AI event, the company signaled its next generation of chips, the MI350 and the upcoming MI400 series. And then someone else took the stage, someone from OpenAI. It was revealed that OpenAI had been quietly working with AMD. They weren't just a customer, they had been a design partner. They had given AMD a lot of feedback that had heavily informed the new chip's architecture. A few months later, the official announcement dropped. OpenAI's next-generation AI infrastructure, the engine for whatever comes after GPT-5, would run on AMD Instinct GPUs. The deal would start with the MI450 series in 2026 and extend for years. It was a deal valued in the tens of billions of dollars, with the potential to reach $100 billion. AMD's stock exploded, jumping over 70%. But the most fascinating part was buried in the press release. This wasn't a simple purchase. AMD had issued OpenAI a warrant for up to 160 million shares of AMD common stock. That is nearly 10% of the entire company. These shares would vest as specific milestones are achieved. This was the hidden mechanism. OpenAI isn't just a customer. It's now a partner with a massive vested financial interest in making AMD's platform succeed. The more AMD GPUs OpenAI deploys, the more of AMD's stock it gets, at a low price. This is what an all-or-nothing bet looks like. Jensen Huang, NVIDIA's CEO, was asked about the deal. He responded with beautiful, competitive sarcasm. It's imaginative, it's unique and surprising. I'm surprised that they would give away 10% of the company before they even built it. And so, anyhow, it's clever, I guess. But he, and many others, may have missed the point. AMD had to do it. AMD was losing a war because of software. They couldn't build a software ecosystem to compete with CUDA. So they found a partner so big, so powerful, and so motivated that it could ignore AMD's software problem entirely. OpenAI isn't going to use ROCm. They are building their own software stack, like Triton, to talk directly to AMD's bare metal hardware. OpenAI gets to break its crippling dependence on NVIDIA. It gets a custom-built chip, a guaranteed supply chain, and a massive financial upside. AMD gets the one thing it could never earn, a golden child customer so large that it will force the entire industry to create a new ecosystem around it. This deal wasn't a gamble, it was a king-making. The MI400 series isn't even here yet. AMD is betting its entire future on a product that doesn't exist, and it gave away 1/10 of its stock for the privilege. But this battle was never really about who had the faster chip. It was always about the software. The question now is no longer, can AMD's software ever catch up to CUDA? The new question is, does CUDA even matter when OpenAI can just write its own? Time will tell, but this changes everything. So what do you really think we're seeing here? Is this a brilliant strategic move by AMD to break a monopoly? Or is it the most desperate gamble in tech history? Let me know your thoughts below.